and they went on. I'm sorry, I can hardly see this little writing in this Bible, and I have on my glasses. Her daughters-in-law, and they went with her, and they went on the way to return to the land of Judah. And Naomi said to her two daughters-in-law, "Go, return each to her mother's house. The Lord deal kindly with you, as you have dealt with the dead and with me. The Lord grant that you may find rest, each in the house of her husband." So she kissed them, and they lifted up their voices and wept. And they said to her, "Surely we will return with you to your people." But Naomi said, "Turn back, my daughters. Why will you go with me? Are there still sons in my womb, that they may be your husbands? Turn back, my daughters, go. For I am too old to have a husband. If I should say I have hope, if I should have a husband tonight and should also bear sons, would you wait for them till they were grown? Would you restrain yourselves from having husbands? No, my daughters, for it grieves me very much for your sakes, that the hand of the Lord has gone out against me." Then they lifted up their voices and wept again, and Orpah kissed her mother-in-law, but Ruth clung to her. And she said, "Look, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her guides." Very important, they're her guides. "Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Entreat me not to leave you, or to turn back from following after you. For wherever you go, I will go, and wherever you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people, your God, my God. Where you die, I will die, and there will I be buried. The Lord do so to me, and more so, if anything but death parts you and me." When she saw that she was determined to go with her, she stopped speaking to her. Now the two of them went until they came to Bethlehem. And it happened when they had come to Bethlehem that all the city was excited because of them. And the women said, "Is this Naomi?" So they recognized Naomi from previously being there. And I think this scripture is very important because you see that Naomi's example of a godly woman did something for Ruth, a Moabite. That changed her life, one young lady's life. That's important. And like my husband always said, it doesn't matter who that one is, because that one could be you. You know, how important is that? If we can change one person's life, that one person can change a multitude of lives by their touch, by their lifestyles, by their willingness to say yes to God. So how are we living before our young ladies? How are we presenting ourselves as women of God before our young ladies? Do they see God in us really? Or is it just on Sunday when we dress up and look pretty on the outside? When we leave here, do our words reflect godly wisdom? What do they see? What do they hear from us when we leave the church? So, you see, Ruth wanted to cling to her because of the example that she set before her. And today we're going to look at ourselves as women of God from three different views. Through the eye of God, through the earlier passage we just read, as well as a few supporting scriptures. So are we concerned? And when we talk about being concerned, we're going to look at Philippians 2 and 4, and I'm going to ask someone to get these scriptures ready for me. And then we're going to go back to Ruth, chapter 2, verses 10 through 12. We're going to look at being concealed. 2 Corinthians chapter 4, verses 1 through 5. God bless you. Then we're going to look at being convicted. Romans chapter 6, verses 1 through 3. I'm going to give y'all time. Have everybody find this, or whoever found the scriptures for me. When I need them, I'm going to call on you. So in that reading we just read from Ruth, in the beginning that we talked about with Eve, we know that God made us unique. He made women very unique. He put us in support roles. He created Eve to be a helpmeet. He created us with an amazing strength as women, that we know how to self-soothe when things are bad. We know how to improvise with things. We know how to do a lot of things. God has equipped us with so many abilities as women. And not to take the role of men, but he knew that there was going to come a time when we would have to stand up for ourselves. So he's not trying to make us men, but he put a strength in us that nobody can move. When you trust in him and when you know him, and we're going to find out just how well we know him. Be concerned. Who has Philippians 2, verses 1 through 4? Can you read it for me?
Yes. If there be before any consolation in Christ, of any comfort of love, of any fellowship of the Spirit, of any vows and mercies, fulfill ye my joy, that ye be like-minded, having the same love, being of one accord, of one mind. Let nothing be done through strife or vainglory, but in lowliness of the mind, let each esteem other better than themselves. Look not every man on his own things, but every man also on the things of others.
Amen. Amen. We know when he says man, he's talking about man and women. He's talking about creation, not just the man. And I thought that was important because if you're only thinking about yourself, you don't have time to be being an example to other young ladies because you don't really care what they see, what they think, or what they're going through. So we are to look at others, just like Naomi did with Ruth. She was concerned about her never having a husband, even though it meant that she might have to go back and marry one of these Moabites. But she didn't want her to be alone because back then, in those days, when women were alone, they had it very, very hard, especially if you were a widow. You had no covering anymore. People mistreated you. You weren't in your father's house anymore. So that was a concern of Naomi's, that Ruth would never have a husband and she would be unprotected. But she lived such a life before Ruth that Ruth said, that doesn't matter to me if I never get married. Can we say that? If I never get married, I'm just going to go with you. And your God is going to be my God. Your people are going to be my people. So that example of Naomi is the example we need to live because she had to have lived some type of life before her that just got her attention and she did not want to leave it. So having a husband wasn't her main concern, and it can't be ours. I know I'm focusing on, seems like single women, but I'm not, because I'm going to get to you married women, married woman. But I'm not. But it's while we're single, can we wait? Can we be satisfied with Jesus? And that's what he wants to know. He wants you to be God's woman. So when you're concerned enough about someone else, you put your needs, your wants aside to help them. And Naomi was just the person that God sent to Moab for Ruth. I believe he had a purpose in that. And Ruth was obedient. Naomi was obedient in going to Moab, even though she didn't want to, because it was her husband's desire to go there. So she was obedient, married ladies, to her husband. Whether she agreed with him or not wasn't the option. She went, and she lived there, and she dwelt there. And she pleased God by pleasing her husband. So that's how we please God as married women. We please our husband. We obey our husbands. We don't have to always agree with their decisions or situations, but we obey them. And we allow them to make the choices that God has given them to make so that they can continue to be the men of God they need to be. That's why a lot of men aren't men today. We take over. We take over their roles. We tell them what to do. We tell them when to get up, when to go, what to spend, not to spend. We don't allow them to be men. So we have to be careful with taking over, overstepping our bounds, so to speak, as God would say. As my husband said, stay in your lane. You know, it doesn't mean that you are happy with everything that he does or says or every decision that he makes. But you trust him, this man of God that you've married, enough to say yes. So now you have to trust him in his decisions. So, are we on the same page? Any questions, comments?
On this, letting him take over.
Say that again.
I know he's supposed to be in the top, but what if he don't do anything in the top?
Then you take him to God.
And
The man that God has given you, you pray about him.
I pray about him, but he ain't praying. So if he's not praying, he's not gonna get what I'm praying for him for.
That's not always true. That's not always true because God, you do a marvelous work. You're a true praying woman. What are your motives when you pray? Are you telling God what to do or are you asking God to do it? How do you pray to God when you take your husband to God? Exactly. You go to God and you're giving your petition, you're giving your concern, and just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean God is not moving.
I know you have to forgive the person 70 times 7, but how long do you wait before he does what he's supposed to do? 70 times 7?
And some more.
Now you got it wrong.
All right.
My question is that for the single women, well, this applies to another Christian man instead. Supposing that this man is not a Christian.
Then that's what we're going to talk about as
Okay.
well.
All right.
When a single woman, who is the woman of God, meets someone, she's going to know he's of God because he is going to, and I can tell you my story, because she knows now just how good God is to her and will not settle for anything less than that. When my husband came to me in Milwaukee, I'm from Milwaukee, godly man, I loved him. I couldn't wait till he would come there and preach and do revivals. I wasn't looking for him. I was just looking for his knowledge. And because I was so satisfied with Jesus, and we as women, single women, have to be so satisfied with Jesus that nothing else can take our hearts from him. My husband, now that he's my husband, still can't take my heart from him. So when you're at that point with Jesus, that you know nothing else but this type of treatment will do. Not that we know the saying, nobody can do me like Jesus, but he's very close. You know, he's very close. He cares for me. He cares for my well-being. He cares for my finances and everything else. He cares about everything about me. He cares about my spiritual growth. He takes care of the things that he is supposed to take care of. He is the man of God. And I had a lot of questions for him before I said yes. Don't be afraid to ask that man some questions. I don't care how godly you say you are. I got some questions for you. Why are you here anyway? And why are you asking me? So I had some questions because I was very satisfied with God. And I'm going to pick up from Milwaukee and move to Detroit to be with you. I got to know some things about you first. So we're going to ask some questions. You're not going to settle. It's okay to ask that man questions. And my husband says, just make him mad a couple of times, see what he really like. You know, and don't give in. I'm talking about sex. Don't give in. If he can't wait for you, then that's what he wanted. Because if he really wants you, woman of God, he'll wait for you. Because he sees that you respect yourself enough that you're not going to let anybody just bounce on you. So respect yourself. You don't have to say, well, if I don't, then I might lose him. Well, if you lose him, he wasn't for you. Because if God gave him to you, ain't nobody going to be able to take him. So if he's willing to wait for you, then you got something to think about. You know, if he's not forcing all that on you, you got something to think about. But the Bible tells us not to be unequally yoked. So if a man that